Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom, B and C period, right? We are now actually going to be talking just to B and C period a little bit, going over the stuff that we actually would have covered in class, where we're talking about the onset of World War II, right? Now, the particular where we left off in our last flip, though, right, with the stuff that you were supposed to get down, get covered, things like that, is actually going to be being picked up right here, right? Now, I know you already wrote a bunch of this stuff down about totalitarianism and the two different types of totalitarian dictators that are on the rise in Europe during this time period. But the two big things that we need to understand right now is we've got two different kinds of totalitarian dictators, right? But really quickly before we get into those two different kinds, totalitarianism is a system of government where total control, hence totalitarianism, right, is over the lives of its citizens through the use of a centralized dictatorship. Now, the thing about it, though, is during the 30s and 40s, you saw the rise of a couple of different types of totalitarian dictators. Now, the first one is known as a fascist dictatorship, right? And because fascism is on the rise. Now, they're hiding behind the quality of socialism during this time period, okay? So something that you have to understand is both of our fascist dictators that are going to rise up during the 30s are actually going to say originally that they're socialists, but they called themselves National Socialists, right? And we had to be very, very careful because literally there was no word for fascism until this other guy came along and named it. But where the word fascism itself comes from, which has nothing to do with socialism really because it's a far-right authoritarian dictatorship, right? They actually are going to be generating their name from this thing. That thing that you probably remember from ancient Rome, right? That thing that is a axe that's got a bunch of rods wrapped around it for its strength, right? And what that thing was supposed to symbolize in ancient Rome is the union between the state and its people, right? Forming a more cohesive bond because that axe right there, you could break the handle over your leg if you throw it down hard enough, but with all of those other sticks wrapped around it, you couldn't do it, right? And it's supposed to show the strength and durability of the government and the people once combined together, right? Now, the thing about it, though, that was an ancient Roman symbol, right? We talked about that, how Caesar received a fasces when he became the consul of Rome in 59 BC, right? We understand that whole thing about it, and why out of all the things would actually an Italian dictator pick that image? Because it relates back to ancient Rome. Because you see, that's the essence of fascism, right? It is a far-right, ultra-nationalist government style characterized by forcible suppression of the opposition, right? And strict obedience to the state. So that thing right there that he's trying to invoking, this particular one, a man by the name of Benito Mussolini, the guy that's actually sitting right there, actually was trying to invoke that old idea of the history of Italy, right? That ultra-nationalism, that the fact that the Italians were once the Roman Empire and spanned for most of Europe, right? And they're trying to invoke that idea of an intense figure, right? And so the thing about it, though, is it's also characterized by the suppression of the opposition. In fascist dictatorships, it's usually a one-party system, right? A one-party system where the fascist party itself is in rule, and they also believe in the idea of blowing up people's heads to make them think that they are like a superior race, that they are actually better than everybody else, and that they need to forcibly suppress other people that go against them, right? And so the one from Italy is this guy right here named Benito, write this down, Benito, B-E-N-I-T-O, Mussolini, right? Benito Mussolini is the guy that actually names the fascist party. And then you, of course, know this guy that's the fascist dictator of Germany, that's Adolf Hitler, right? Now, think about their essence, right? Think about their stuff. By the way, I cover up that symbol because I don't even like it that much. You know what I'm talking about? It so disgusts me that I decide that I'm going to cover it up and, like, you know, make them roll around. It's great with a rainbow. So now going into it, though, that you have to understand is that both of these guys, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, really drilled home that idea of the ultra-nationalist state, right? The idea that everybody looks down upon us, but we will eventually one day rise up and be above them, quote unquote, right? Which is actually not true if you look how World War II went, right? Now, going into it, though, also, what you need to understand is that's how they're better characterized, okay? They also hate communists, right? And that is another type of our dictators from this time period, okay? The other type of totalitarian dictator at the time is a communist dictatorship, right? Now, a lot of sociological theorists actually believe that communism and fascism are actually a little bit closer to each other when their dictatorships are really put into power, right? That a communist dictator and a fascist dictator are actually closer to each other. It's more like a horseshoe rather than a line. So now, but that's the horseshoe theory, okay? And then you can consult, you know, anything, any source you want to actually look into about that. But the communist totalitarian dictator that rose up at the time was actually Joseph Stalin of the USSR, right? Of course, of the Soviet Union. Now, communism is that idea, the collectivization of the means of production and prevention of economic elites, right? The idea of trying to prevent a bourgeois from ever rising up again. Remember back to our last unit, right? The elements of communism, your proletariat, your bourgeois, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that most communist dictatorships and communist rulerships that go through a communist revolution get stalled out at step 2, right? And so just to understand this a little bit better, there are 3 steps to creating a communist society and a communist revolution. Step 1, you have a violent revolution. Russia, check, right? Step 2, a very, very powerful dictator comes into power. Vladimir Lenin, check, right? But eventually that guy's going to die and he's replaced by this individual, Joseph Stalin, or Old Uncle Joe. And then there's Francisco Franco, who's also a fascist as well, but we're not going to worry about him right now because it's a crash course, right? We're not going to worry about the Spanish Civil War, but we are going to talk about it a little bit. But Francisco Franco is the fascist dictator from Spain, right? Now, going into it, though, those are your totalitarian dictators that are on the rise. Now, interestingly enough, for those of you who are paying attention, one of them was our ally, right? Joseph Stalin actually was the ally of the Americans during World War II. But the thing you have to understand, though, is those fascist dictatorships are going to rise up during the 1920s, right? They're going to rise up during those roaring 20s, during that age of anxiety where things are actually way worse than people are giving credit for. Because think about the area that actually Hitler rose up in. He rose up in Germany when their economy was hyperinflated with funds, right? He rose, like Mussolini's going to rise up in Italy when there's a lot of war destruction in the north and also essential businesses have really been broken down, right? And also think about those World War veterans, right? Those World War I veterans are the prime target of people like Mussolini and Hitler, right? A little bit different for Stalin because he's a communist leader and stuff like that, so it actually has much more to do with the Communist Party and the state and stuff like that and appealing to the poor. But what actually has more, like in the fascist dictatorship though, they really capitalize off this thing called post-war bitterness, right? Now look, but then everybody's about to get a little bit bitter because 1929 is going to happen. And if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that something really big happened in 1929, right? And that's the great stock market crash, October 29th, 1929, that occurred in the United States of America. But Mr. Terry, I thought that this only affected America. Come on now, y'all. You need to understand that economics are getting globalized more and more as time goes on, right? And that America's economy represents a lot of the world economy at the time, okay? So the thing to think about it is because the stock market crash occurred in America, a lot of businesses are going to tank and it's going to create a big a void in and of itself in the economy, leading to the pulling down of ones in Europe as well. And this is going to spread all over the world, right? Now, why did this happen, right? There's 2 different reasons why this actually happened, right? And I'm actually missing one. I need you to write an extra one down, right? Why did this happen? 1, playing the market on credit, okay? And 2, overproduction. Write that down. Overproduction. That's the second reason why this happened. For some reason, I don't have it on there, right? Now, the thing about it, though, let's go ahead and talk about overproduction first, right? So in the 1920s, what ended up happening is businesses and farmers, okay, not on purpose, not deliberately, not in cahoots with one another, were actually overproducing certain things, right? Farmers were producing more food than was necessary, right? And businesses were making more products than were necessary and were selling at such a low markdown price in this new consumer economy that everybody could afford one, right? A great example of this is the Model T, right? Remember when we looked at that in class, right? That this idea the auto industry is blowing up, the Model T4 being made on the assembly line for a cheap price and everybody can afford one, right? So in the 1920s, everybody did afford one, and most people were riding around in their own Model T Ford. Well, the thing about it, though, is if you've got 2 of them at home, do you need a third one? No. And once the market got saturated with these products, Henry Ford didn't have anybody to sell to anymore, right? If Henry Ford ain't got anybody to sell to anymore, what's going to happen to his stock price? Boom, and it's just going to start going down because sales began to dip and the stock market began to crash over, right? Now, the thing about it, though, as well is let's think about what was propping that stock market up. It's people investing in it. You have to understand how stock markets and stocks work. It's a lot like a gamble, right? So what happens is if you're looking at this entire graph, people were investing heavily in the stock market, right? This is the Dow Jones right before the 1929 crash. And as you can see, it's going up and 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 up. And then right around here in October is where it goes skaboom and just starts crashing, right? And a lot of this had to do with a lot of those like different companies losing their money. Stock market goes down. But where were people getting that money to invest in their stocks, right? They were getting it in loans from banks. Y'all, loans. They were playing it on credit. They didn't even own that money, right? So now the fact that they now bet money they didn't own, technically, they borrowed from the bank, this money is now owed. Now, where does everyone go, or where did everyone go? To the bank to withdraw their money, to pay off those credited amounts, right? And those loans in general. Well, the money's all gone, y'all, because if we remember the Medicis, it all revolved around the idea that not everybody was going to show up on the exact same day and request all their money back, right? Well, when they did, the banks began to close and shut and say, we don't have any money for y'all, right? And when the banks didn't have any money to give anybody back, they also don't have any money to give to these companies, right? And if the thing that holds onto your money is now out of business, your money is gone, right? So welcome to the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression then set in and it swept the entire world, right? And the reason why is because it affected the entire West. A lot of it has to do with this thing known as the Dawes Plan, right? And a ripple effect that occurred, okay? Now we'll Ha! Just kidding. You thought I was about to cut it off. As you can tell, it's a little bit darker outside and stuff like that. Now I was waiting for my wife to finish up with some of her clients. But the big thing about it, though, okay, we need to understand why did this great stock market crash of 1929, October 29th, 1929, also known as Black Tuesday, why did that actually lead to a massive fallout of all economic systems throughout the West, right? Well, a lot of it has to do with this thing called the Dawes Plan, right? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the United States was actually the centralized location of pretty much all of business loans and financial support at the time following the end of World War I. So the thing about it is the Dawes Plan is key into understanding why this stock market crash affected everyone so dramatically, right? So I want you to imagine for a hot second, you got three people sitting at a table. This is the Dawes Plan, right? Now, really quick, you got three people sitting at a table. One person is Germany, the other person is France, the other person is America, right? Now, going into the very, very first years after World War I, you got 1920, 1921, all right? So those 2 years coming right off the tail end of it, Germany was paying their loans, right? They were paying the reparations back. They were paying the thing that the Treaty of Versailles said they had to do, right? And they were making payments to France and to Britain as well, right? And so they're paying off France, and they're paying off France, and they're paying off France. They just keep paying them, right? Now, what ends up happening, though, in 1921, they start defaulting on these payments, which means they just don't have any money left. So I want you to imagine this person that represents Germany just literally is like empty pockets and is like, France, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you, but I don't have any money, right? Which leads to them just printing a bunch of it, and that causes their hyperinflation, right? Well, when the French are not satisfied with this hyperinflated money, they eventually start demanding more money from Germany. And we, America, are sitting at this table with them being like, oh God, oh God, oh God, this is going to blow up into a whole other war again. This is going to explode. This is going to get after it. We're going to end up getting sucked into a war again. But the Dawes Plan was come up with by the vice president at the time, all right? Dawes, right? Like his name was Dawes, like that's his last name, right? I think it's Henry Dawes or Charles Dawes. It's one of the two. It doesn't really matter. But the Dawes Plan was come up with by the Americans and by the vice president. And Dawes goes, all right, I got an idea. Check this out. Germany. Hey, Germany. Here's some money, right? So the United States gives money to Germany so that they can then pay France with it, right? And then we look over at France and Britain and we're like, hey, France and Great Britain, remember all that stuff we sold you in World War I and you said that you would owe us money at the back end, right? You would pay for it after the war was over. We want that money back, right? And so the French and the British start paying us. And then we take that same lump of money and then we hand it back to Germany again. And we just keep doing this round and round and round, right? The entire Dawes Plan was the idea that we give money to Germany, Germany gives money to France, France gives money to us, right? And then we just keep moving that big chunk of money around. But now I want you to imagine what's going to happen, though, whenever we run out of money, right? The United States actually doesn't have any money to give Germany anymore when the stock market crash occurs. And when this occurs, it sends a ripple effect through the entirety of the westernized economies, right? Through the entirety of the westernized economies, and ends up kind of shutting down a lot of banks worldwide, right? And so the failure of the Dawes Plan is a really, really big reason why this then actually kind of bleeds over. And by 1933, 30% of Germans will be out of work. But now that's where we're going to cut it off finally. Go ahead and watch your flip for homework if you want to go ahead and bang it out or something like that. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good